Representative Graves has joined us yet. If you have joined us, let me know. All right, not hearing from Representative Graves. I'm glad to now call upon Representative Levin for 5 minutes of questions.
Well, thank you, Chairman Lowenthal. As I discussed during yesterday's markup, last week's oil spill off the coast of Orange County has once again highlighted the need for our country to change the status quo when it comes to offshore drilling policy. The first step that we need to take is common sense, and that's to end new offshore oil and gas leasing in Southern California and off the Pacific coast. The Build Back Better Act would invest in the long-term protection of our coastal communities by doing just that. But addressing new leasing is not enough. We need to re-examine the existing leases off of California, because as long as dangerous oil and gas infrastructure is there, it will continue to pose a significant threat not only to our environment, but to our economy, an economy, coastal tourism, coastal recreation worth billions of dollars in California. Now, I recognize that dealing with this problem will not be easy. Decommissioning is expensive, and it'll certainly face opposition from the fossil fuel companies that profit from drilling activity and their allies who benefit from continued extraction. They'll take great pains to distort the facts and mislead the public about the respective risks and benefits. And sadly, we've seen this deception before. But make no mistake, this endeavor is absolutely necessary for the well-being of our local economy and our environment here in coastal California, and it's broadly supported by our coastal constituents, Republicans, Democrats, Independents. This is not partisan here in our coastal communities. So I appreciate that I have colleagues that are here to share my desire to address this problem. I look forward to working with you closely. And with that, I'll turn to some questions. Ms. Savitz, the pipeline oil spill off the coast of Orange County that has had severe consequences on our local businesses and communities was the result of federal leases sold by the Interior Department decades ago, clearly demonstrating how these leases can have long-lasting impacts years or decades after they're sold. Do you think we should continue to sell more of our public oceans to the oil and gas industry?
Thank you for the question, Congressman Levin. As you know, Oceana opposes any new lease sales and has been vocal on the need to permanently protect the Atlantic, the Pacific, and the Eastern Gulf, at least for a start. We know that oil will spill if we drill. We know that it affects coastal economies, as you said, whether it's restaurants, hotels, dive shops, surf shops, fishing, commercial fishing. There's a long list. It costs billions every time that happens. And the obvious other piece of it, of course, is that oil and gas are driving climate change. And that's something we need to stop. Now, remember, there's no shortage of offshore oil and gas opportunity for the oil industry. The oil industry is sitting on so many, nearly 8.5 million acres of unused or non-producing leases. 75% of the total leased acreage of public waters, they're sitting on it and not using it. So even if we ended all new leasing, it would not end offshore production.
Thank you for that. Dr. Bosch and Mr. Schuert, both your written statements expressed concern that financial assurances held by Bessie are a fraction of expected offshore decommissioning costs. Mr. Schuert, you suggest the number is as low as 10%, could be even lower than that. Are either of you concerned that if the Interior Department starts requiring more upfront collateral, it'll drive more oil and gas companies into bankruptcy and lead to more orphaned wells and pipelines? I know that's an argument that some make when it comes to decommissioning platforms off Southern California.
Sure. Maybe if I could take a shot at that one first. I mean, I think one thing that's important to note is if you have a company that already has an existing financial obligation to plug a well, decommission the infrastructure, and it says, I cannot afford to do that. I cannot afford to acquire the financial assurance that I'm going to be able to do that in the future. Then you've got a company that maybe is not going to be able to handle that obligation already. It's just it hasn't gone to bankruptcy yet. It's already a problem. That's the first point. And the second is that problem is not going to get better with time. That problem is going to get worse with time as production from whatever facilities they currently have decline. It's going to get worse from time from the taxpayer standpoint because you will lose other predecessors in interest that would possibly be able to fill in if that operator couldn't do it. It will get worse simply because it becomes, because infrastructure degrades and so on and so forth. And so I would say, yes, there is some risk, but this is a thing where you have to tackle it right now. It is only going to get worse over time. So that's the first point. The second point I would make is if you look at the Fieldwood bankruptcy, what you see in the case of Apache, which transferred a number of these assets to Fieldwood to begin with, is they acquired far more financial assurance from this entity that ultimately went bankrupt than what the government is getting today. They required a trust that had to be filled with at least $80 million or the equivalent in decommissioning being done every year. That trust had to be replenished up to 125% of the expected decommissioning costs that Apache would face if it had to handle the work. So it was more than fully protecting itself. And this is one of those late-in-life entities. And I think the point and the lesson here is you don't really know whether people are going to go bankrupt or not in this situation. What you do know is that you need to protect the interests of the taxpayer.
Well, we're over time, Mr. Chairman. If I could briefly hear from Mr. Bosch on this topic.
I think my colleague has answered it in more detail than I could, with more expertise. So I'm fine with what he said.
Well, I appreciate you both. I will remain committed to ending new offshore drilling in Southern California, and I will do all I can to move forward with decommissioning as well. And as I said, I know it won't be easy. I know we have powerful interests against us who like to distort the facts and create a false narrative to line their own pockets, but I will not stop until it's done, because that's what our constituents in coastal California demand. Mr. Chairman, I'll yield back.